people to start logging in.
Of course, yeah. Yeah. This is interesting. It says live on Facebook. So you run this session every weekend, or it's like alternative weeks?
So it kind of varies.
Okay.
When we have a good topic. So usually we average about once in 6 weeks.
Once in 6. Okay. Good.
Yeah, 4 to 6 weeks.
Good.
Yeah. So it's we this picked up a lot. We started doing a lot of these things when COVID hit. And,
yes.
We started doing a lot of awareness sessions and getting doctors from abroad,
right.
An international perspective. So that has
Sure,
really changed. How are things in Florida right now?
Oh, it's terrible. I mean, the cases are just skyrocketing. Unfortunately, we have a Republican governor who doesn't believe in masks or any kind of preventive measures, right? So people are out. I mean, like in the evening when I go for a walk, less than half the people that I see are wearing masks. And so obviously, it's terrible. And then hospital, and as this state has elderly population, significant part of elderly population who are in nursing homes and things of that nature. Those are being affected terribly.
It's appalling. I think how people are underestimating.
Seriously.
Taking precautions, but there is actually no other way. And we don't even know that now vaccines is actually the solution, and that's what people are not realizing. And when will it actually happen? Will everybody get the dosage?
Correct. Yeah, it's unfortunately, I think that it's become more a political issue than a health issue, right? And that's what politics has done to this thing, at least in the United States. India is a little bit different, but unfortunately here, pandemic has become political, and you'll be seeing the impact of that, unfortunately.
So I think we should start now.
Yes.
Yeah.
Sounds good.
Yeah. So hello and welcome everyone to our Facebook Live. This is actually a very interesting topic we're going to talk about today. Today is, as a doctor, now if you think about it, every day somebody is taking a medicine, and every day in your family, you may be taking a medicine, or your loved one will be taking a medicine. Somebody may be taking a vitamin pill, or you're taking a crocin if you have a headache, or maybe taking blood pressure medicines, cholesterol medicines, or something something or the other, right? We are all taking medicines every day in our family. Now, as a doctor, I prescribe at least 200 medicines a day. Even my inpatients and my outpatients, and when I'm operating, I'm using at least 200, if not more, maybe even 400 medicines a day. Now, I recently read a study that medicines can be of substandard quality, or sometimes even counterfeit and fake medicines. The number varies between 3% according to some studies, and other people have said as much as 25%. So the percentage of fake medicines and substandard medicines varies depending upon what data you use. Now, India is the pharmacy of the world. We prescribe medicines, we supply medicines all over the world. And the buyers are across. We are third in terms of volume and 10th in terms of the sheer value of the sales. The dollar value of the sales, we're number 10 in the world. And in terms of volume, we are number 3. So we are the pharmacy for the world. There have been multiple cases that have come up across for a long time now of medicines being of substandard quality leading to poor outcomes. And there was one which came out not too long ago of children who actually died because of taking contaminated cold syrup. Imagine a cough syrup you're taking, which is contaminated, and that leads to death because of contamination purposes. Now, today we have with us a very, very special guest, Mr. Dinesh Thakur. Mr. Thakur is a very well-known person in this area. He is a public health activist. He is a trained chemical engineer. And during his business career, he worked in the pharmaceutical industry, and his career spanned from drug discovery, development, and clinical research and regulatory affairs in the pharmaceutical industry. He advocates for high quality, affordable medicines and a safe and secure drug supply chain. Now, his also claim to fame is that he was the whistleblower in the Ranbaxy case. Many of you may have read that Ranbaxy was involved in giving substandard quality of medicines to the US. And that ended up, the US FDA imposed a fine of $500 million on the company. For his whistleblower work, he was recognized widely, and he was the recipient of the Joe A. Calloway Award for Civic Courage and ACFE Robertson Sentinel Award. Now, I first heard about Mr. Thakur when I read this book. This book was recommended to me, The Bottle of Lies, in which the story revolves around him and some of the work that he has done. And I got very inspired when I read about it. I was shocked. I couldn't believe what I was reading. And I contacted Mr. Thakur, and he agreed to come and talk more about this. Mr. Thakur, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Dr. Gupta, and thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, this is such an important topic because medicines are kind of like a part of our lives, in some form or the other, whether it is allopathic, whether it is Ayurvedic, whether it is homeopathy, whatever form it is. But somewhere or the other, majority of us are taking medications. And one starts wondering when you hear of such stories like what happened in Jammu, or when you, as a doctor or even as a consumer, you see the vast array of brands that we have in medications. For one generic medication, we have multiple, brands. So the first question I wanted to ask was, what is the difference when people use the term generic and non-generic drugs? What does it actually mean?
Yeah, so I think that, the way that we define generic in India is very different than what is internationally accepted as generic medicine, right? So let's start with the global definition of what a generic medicine is, and then we'll talk a little bit about, how in India, how our understanding of generic medicine is different from that. So what happens is that most medicine, right, it's discovered at some point in time. So there are scientists who essentially study different diseases, and they figure out that in order to stop the progression of that disease or to alleviate that, there is some chemical or biological entity that you can give to the patient. And this has been, it's historical, right? It started out with antibiotics, preliminary antibiotics, to stop, when the germ theory became viable, several hundred years ago, and it's evolved over a period of time. But the fundamental thing is that there is some science that goes behind it. You study the fact that the human body is afflicted with a certain disease, and you figure out how do you either sort of slow the progression of disease, or how do you stop that disease by giving an external, chemical or a biological entity. That's what a medicine is. Now, what happens is that anybody who sort of conducts research and discovers this medicine, what they do is they file for what is called a patent. A patent essentially is it's an award given by the government to people who invest in research and development, and then that says that for a period of time, right? Usually internationally accepted period is a 17-year time period, that the person who discovers that, right? And it has to be at the patent, there are criteria to get a patent. It has to be novel in the sense that it has to be new, right? Or something that has not been known before, right? So you get a patent, and then you have the ability to monetize that investment. So you've invested several years of money by hiring scientists, building labs, doing testing, and you've proven that what you've discovered actually helps in treating the disease, right? So the government basically says, look, because you've invested all this money, we give you a certain amount of time that you can then monetize it. You can make money off of that, right? But then also realize that after a period of time, when the patent expires, then that knowledge becomes public property in the sense that anybody who has the ability to make that, right, in a certain way, they can make it, right? And then they can sell it. So what that does is it introduces competition into the market. So rather than having one company that discovered or invented that particular medicine, more companies come in, they make it, And the theory of economic theory of competition says the more providers that there are, the price comes down, right? So once the drug goes off patent, then the price of the drug drops significantly. Now, in the area of the therapeutic area that Dr. Gupta practices, if you remember about 10, 15 years ago, there was a lot of focus on the fact that, statins, a class of drugs that are called statins, they essentially became the standard of care. Once you hit the age of 40 or 45, your cardiologist would put you on a low dose statin because you would have indications for disease progression at that point in time. So there's a lot of research that was done. So one of these drugs was called atorvastatin, right? This was a drug that was discovered and invented by Pfizer, and it was sold under the brand name of Lipitor, right? And when the drug was under patent, one pill of Lipitor would cost about $8 to $9, right? That was the cost of that drug. But when Lipitor went off patent, right, when it became a generic, when the patent expired, the cost of that drug dropped to less than a few pennies, right? So essentially it became a generic drug and it became widely accessible. And so the definition of a generic versus patent in global settings is that a drug that is under a patent is called a branded drug. And the drug that goes off patent and is made by multiple companies, the same formulation, is called a generic drug. Now, in India, our understanding is very, very different. Remember, until about mid-2000s, when India became signatory to the TRIPS agreement, the trade-related aspects of intellectual property, we only recognized process patents. So, this is a different discussion, but the patents are of two kinds. So when you invent something, you can look at the final product and say we're patenting that, or you can patent the process by which you make that. So the process and product patents, they're very different, right? India didn't recognize product patents until we became signatory to TRIPS. But after that, we now recognize both. But the point here is that the way that our industry evolved is that when we brand something, when we promote something, in the sense that if the pharma company has a team of medical representatives that come to the doctor's office, educate the doctors around, the importance of that medicine, how that medicine is different or better than what is available alternatively on the market, that is what we call branded medicine in India. The thing that is not branded is called generic. So the definition of generic in India is very different than what genetic medicine in the United States is, right? So, we have medicine that, is considered generic overseas, but it could be promoted by a company made in India. In India, that's called branded medicine. So that is not what brand means, outside of India. So we have to keep that distinction in mind when we think about generic and brand medicines.
That's a very interesting and that's a very important point, because I think the concept even in our heads is that generic it's the same thing all over the world.
Right.
In India, it's actually different, and it's different, in other countries.
Yeah.
So on that basis, when there's a patent, like a drug has a patent, and then when the patent goes away, is there a difference in the way it's manufactured, or it's
a very good question. It's a very good question, and this goes to the question that Dr. Gupta asked earlier on, which was, how do you measure something being substandard, right? So the way that we formulate a drug, right? If you think about, how a drug is made, a drug has an active ingredient. So let me just take a simple example, right? The medicine that we take for headache, it's called ibuprofen, right? If you go buy ibuprofen at the chemist shop and you look at the back of that blister pack in which it's packaged, it will say ibuprofen 100 milligrams IP, right? So what that means is that if you take one of those tablets from the blister pack, you will get 100 milligrams of this drug, ibuprofen. And the way that we know it's 100 milligrams is that it says IP. So that refers to what is called Indian pharmacopoeia. So globally, there are different pharmacopoeias. So in the United States, we have USP, which is United States Pharmacopoeia. We have British pharmacopoeia, we have European pharmacopoeia, we have Indian pharmacopoeia, right? Our law says that if you want to sell medicine in India, you have to comply with our standards, right? And our standard is Indian pharmacopoeia. Not everything is listed in Indian pharmacopoeia. A lot of new drugs are not listed. So the law actually makes an exception and says that if it's not listed in Indian pharmacopoeia, you can use an international pharmacopoeia to do that. So there are drugs on our market that use USP as well. But the point here is that there are two issues here. One is, how do you know that you're getting 100 milligrams, right? Why not 200? Why not 50, right? Because as a doctor, you know that based on the clinical work you do, prescribing 100 milligrams treats, the disease that you're treating, the affliction that you have, right? That is what you know. You get trained. Your practice tells you that 100 milligrams taken twice a day basically helps you, sort of with migraines, for example. Just take a simple example as migraines, right? Headache, right? Light sensitive nature of what we need to do. If you give 100 milligrams of this drug, it will help the patient sort of cut down the light sensitivities and help with the headache, right? But the question is, how do you know it's 100 milligrams? The way that you know that is because the government says that here is a standard, right? This is our standard. The Indian Pharmacopoeia says this is how you can say it's 100 milligrams. Now, to the question that you're asking, is the generic drug the same thing as a patented drug, right? So what happens is that when the drug goes off patent, the information about how you make that drug becomes publicly available, right? So that's what the pharmacopoeia is supposed to do. Our pharmacopoeia, Indian pharmacopoeia, says that when you manufacture this drug, this is the way that you do that, right? Now, there are two issues here. One is that the active ingredient, which is 100 milligrams of ibuprofen, the same blister pack on the back lists out a number of different things that are not active. Like, let me just give you a simple example, right? If you look at the ibuprofen active substance, it is powder, right? But how do you make a powder look like a tablet, right? You want to make it a tablet so that the tablet, you could put on your tongue and take it with some water. It goes inside your stomach.
Right.
The way you do that is you actually use things that are called binders. So, for example, you can use a wax, edible wax, right? People that you can use that. What wax does is it creates cohesion with the drug, and then you can put it in a tablet punching machine. You put a lot of pressure on it and make it look like a tablet. These are called excipients. Okay. So color, for example, if you're making if you're making a syrup like cough syrup that we talked about, right? How do you make this ibuprofen taste very bitter? So what you're doing is you're adding some sweetener to it so that it becomes palatable. The sweetener doesn't actually treat the disease. The sweetener just makes it easier for you to take that drug. These are inactive things that are in the formulation. These are called excipients. The reason I'm explaining this to you is because the law says that you can substitute these excipients. You don't have to follow the exact formulation. Think about it when you're making, food at home, right? Let's say that, you're making rajma. You've got, the rajma beans, you soak it, you take it out, and then you start making your rajma. Now, rajma is made different ways. If you go to a dhaba on the Delhi, the Panchkula Road, the way the rajma tastes there is very different than if you go to interior of UP where rajma is also consumed, right? Different formulations, right? Different ways to make rajma, right? Rajma is made differently. Now, the question here is that, it's okay for us to consume rajma in different flavors, but, you don't want that kind of variation as a doctor when you're giving medicine, right? Now, when you make rajma, you have garam masala, you have onions, you have all the masala that you're putting in there. Those things are inactive ingredients, from trying to draw an analogy here. Rajma is an active ingredient, right? The law says that you can actually take red onions and substitute them with white onions. It will still make rajma at the end of the day, right? But the problem here is that if you have bad quality onions, then the rajma is going to do a number on your tummy, right? So that is where quality control becomes extremely important for us. So to answer the question in a long-winded way, law says that the active ingredient, which is ibuprofen, has to be exactly 100 milligrams, but you can change the color, you can change the taste, you can change these things, which are inactive ingredients, which will actually make the ibuprofen look like a tablet so that you can give it, right? If it's an elderly person, you can give it as a tablet. If it's a child, then you want to formulate that as a syrup. Crocin syrup, for example, crocin, comes in a tablet form. It also comes in a syrup form, for pediatric use, right? So These are the kind of things that you have to do. So the answer to the question is the inactive ingredients, which are called excipients, can be different between a patented molecule, patented drug, and a generic drug.
No. That's, I think, such a nice thing.
So let me ask you this question. Now, if the inactive products can be different between brand A and brand B and brand C, and the active ingredient is there, right? So that will also affect the cost of the medicine. Now my patients come and tell me that Dr. Gupta, you've written this medicine. This is for 100 rupees a tablet. And just for the sake of argument.
Correct.
I went online and my pharmacist, and I went to my local pharmacy, and my pharmacist said, इतनी महंगी दवाई क्यों ले रहे हो? ये दूसरी दवाई है, same molecule की, ये 30 rupees की है.
बिल्कुल.
So what do I tell him at this point? Normally I tell him, okay, sure. I mean, if it's cheaper, take it. But you know, I don't have any brand loyalty per se. Most doctors don't. So what do you tell a patient in that format?
Yeah. So this is to answer the question you're asking, we have to take a step back and actually ask a question: how do you ensure quality? Right. That is the question. Right. Price is obviously, the difference. The implicit question your patient is asking you is: brand A is 100 rupees a tablet, but brand B is 30 rupees a tablet, right? Why can I not take brand B, which is cheaper, obviously, to me, less expensive to me compared to brand A, right? The implicit assumption there is that brand A and brand B are exactly the same. Right? That's the assumption that the patient is making. That's the assumption that you're also making when you say, ठीक है, अगर 30 रुपए में मिल रही है तो आप 30 रुपए वाली दवाई ले लो. है ना? The point here is that assumption correct? That is the question we have to ask, right? The role of the regulator, right? In India, we have a regulator who looks after our drug supply. And that regulator's name is the Central Drug Control Standards Organization, right? The head of that regulatory agency is the DCGI, the Drug Controller General of India. It is that person's job, or that regulatory agency's job, to ensure that when you prescribe 100 milligram ibuprofen, that 100 milligram ibuprofen, either made by GSK or it's made by hetero drugs, is exactly the same. That's the job of the drug regulator to do that. Unfortunately, in our country, that does not happen. What happens is that and let me say this, there is no guarantee that if you take a drug manufactured by a company with a visible name, the big names that we know, right? GSK, Novartis, Pfizer, there is no guarantee that their drug also is of good quality, because a lot of these medicines are outsourced to third party manufacturers. So there is no guarantee of that. But having said that, let me tell you this. It is the job of the regulator to make sure that whether you buy it of a brand that is 100 rupees or 30 rupees, they should ideally work the same way. The reason why the 100 rupee brand is because the company is putting effort behind promoting it. It's hired a bunch of medical representatives to go and talk about this, convince doctors to be able to prescribe this, right? That is why the price of that could be. I'm not saying it is, but it could be. Perhaps it's a different company that doesn't, spend a lot of money promoting that particular brand, but makes equally good medicine. We just don't know. The issue is this: the market works when the drug regulator enforces standards, right? Just like, in this country, there's a regulator called the US Food and Drug Administration, FDA, right? It's equivalent to our Indian Drug Controller General of India. When the FDA gives permission to manufacture a drug, right, it doesn't matter which company makes it, it is of the exact same quality. Now, that cannot be said of drug quality in India. So the question that you're asking is, if the patient comes in and says, डॉक्टर साहब, ये आपने जो दवाई लिखी है वो 100 रुपए वाली है, और मैं वहां पे गया था गार्डियन फार्मेसी में, वो कहते 30 रुपए वाली दवाई भी वो सेम दवाई है, तो मैं ये क्यों ना लूं? I don't think that you have the information today to be able to say, भाई देखो 30 रुपए वाली दवाई में ये कमियां हैं, या 100 रुपए वाली दवाई में ये कमियां हैं, 30 रुपए वाली दवाई लो. I don't think that you have the information to be able to do that.
Okay. So that means expensive does not mean automatically good quality. right? I mean,
100% right. 100% right.
that is very important, right? Because we, in fact, one of our, viewers just had a question. Meher Gupta had a question that how do you exactly know if the medicine is okay or not? Or are there some pointers as a consumer, as a layman that I can look at to know if my medicine is safe or not?
Absolutely. So that is, I mean, as a consumer, that is the right question to ask, right? The way that you would know that the medicine that you're taking is of good quality is by looking at what the regulator does, right? So, for example, if you go to the CDSCO website, they have a list that they publish every month. So before answering that question, let me just take a step back and think about how we control quality, right? How do we know that what is being made available to us is of quality, right? So there are two different ways of thinking about quality, right? So let me tell you how it is done globally and how is it done in India, right? Globally, the standard is that they say that we assure quality by looking at the process by which you make the product. Meaning, if let's say a manufacturer A is allowed by the government to make medicine B, right? The way that the government does is the government goes to the manufacturer A's facility and looks at the process by which they make the medicine B. And if they're satisfied that they're making it of high quality, then they allow them to sell it in that market. In India, the way we think about this is that we don't go into manufacturing facility and do inspections to the same level that actually happens overseas. Our way of thinking about this is that we will draw samples from the market. So what happens is that each state has its drug inspectors. These drug inspectors go to retail pharmacies. They take samples from retail pharmacies. And these samples are then sent to what are called regional drug testing labs. There are several of these that the government runs, right? And these regional drug testing labs test those samples. And what they do is they publish a result. If their testing finds that the drug is not of good quality, they inform a central drug regulator saying, this product made by this company failed our testing, right? And the drug regulator then publishes that list on their website. So as a consumer, you can go to the Ministry of Health, the Central Drug Regulators website, and there is a list of drugs which are called not of standard quality. That is the terminology we use in India, NSQ drugs. The regulator publishes such a list. So as a consumer, you can go to their website and you can look at the list of the drugs that they publish and say, which of these drugs have been tested by the government labs and have been found to be not of standard quality. And that's how you know.
So what website is this again?
So if you can go to cdsco.gov.in,
okay,
and then you have to kind of navigate from underneath that. That is the regulator's website, cdsco.gov.in. That's the Government of India website for the drug regulator.
Yeah, we'll definitely share that with everyone.
Yeah. So we've talked about these medicines being expensive. We've talked a lot about patents and non-patents and generic drugs. One thing which is very unique, which I found in India when I moved back, and even before that, it was kind of a system for me, was the fixed dose combinations. Now, in the US, when you're prescribing, or abroad, when you're prescribing a drug, you're prescribing like metoprolol, or you're prescribing an aspirin. So, there are these 5-6 drugs and the patient takes each one of them. Sure. Fixed dose combinations where 2 medicines come in 1 tablet is a very common thing in India. It is, everybody uses them. And my understanding is it is just for ease of, that is easy. Then instead of 2 medicines, you just take 1 medicine. You just pop 1 pill instead of 2 pills. So psychologically, the patient is, dekho meri ek dawai kam kar di. That kind of thing also happens. But what are your thoughts about fixed dose combinations, quality, about the absorption? Do they work the same? Should they be independent, or is it better to take 2 different pills?
So this is unique to India. We don't find the same prevalence of what are called fixed dose combinations anywhere else in the world. It's only in India that we do. That's not to say that fixed dose combinations are all bad, right? So there are some fixed dose combinations which actually are quite good. So if you look at in the infectious diseases area, antiretrovirals, because you develop resistance to the pathogen over a period of time, they are treated with cocktails, right? So you will see cocktail of lamivudine, stavudine, so those kind of things do exist. But by and large, even the government's own committees, so the government actually had established a committee called under the leadership of Professor Kakute, Chandrakant Kakute. They actually looked at the entire market and they divided, all of these fixed dose combinations into two categories. One of them, what they call a rational fixed dose combinations, meaning that clinically it made sense for those two drugs to be together. Mm-hmm. And then there were like 300 odd, 400 odd drugs that were called irrational, fixed dose combinations, which basically means clinically didn't make sense, right? Just because you put two drugs together, as a practitioner, it doesn't make sense clinically to treat that. So that's one aspect of it. So let's just put that aside for a minute, saying that there are a certain number of fixed dose combinations that make sense clinically, certain that don't make sense, but they still exist in our market. Mm-hmm. Now let's ask, why do this exist? Why do this irrational fixed dose combinations? Why do this exist? In order to understand this, we have to take a step back and look at, how our drug pricing came about. Right? In India, the government, our government has what is called a national list of essential medicines, right? So these are medicines that the government thinks that, are essential to the health of our country. And so they should be available at a reasonable cost to everybody in the country, right? So things like, paracetamol. Mm-hmm. Malaria is endemic to India, right? We see bouts of malaria and dengue all the time. Medicines that treat malaria, right? Artemisinin, for example. These things are on the list of essential medicines for us in India. Now, what the government says is that if a drug is on the list of essential medicine, it has to be affordable, meaning that even the poorest of poor in the villages of India need to be able to afford that, right? So the government has, under an instrument called the Drug Price Control Order, they control the prices of medicines that are on the national list of essential medicines. So if it's a medicine that is on NLEM, the government says, here is how much you can charge for it. Now, pharma companies are extremely smart. They say, look, if the government controls the price, we can't charge much, right? So let's find a way of working around this. And the fixed dose combinations are essentially an invention to beat the system. So if you create a formulation that has two ingredients put together, then obviously it doesn't fall under the NLEM list, which basically means that at that point in time, you can promote it, you can put branding behind it, you can convince doctors to prescribe it under the guise of ease of use, better patient compliance. Rather than taking one, you're taking two now, right? This is purely an invention of marketing. A lot of these medicines that exist in India are irrational. Don't take my word for it. It's the government's own committee that said that these are irrational. The trouble is that because of a technicality, we really cannot do much about it because there is not enough political will to try and address this issue. Now, it's interesting that if you look at many of these fixed dose combinations, they are a combination of an active drug and a vitamin.
Right. All the time.
Yeah.
Right?
All the time we see that. Yeah.
So you see a B12 or a D, right? The question here is that, do you really need that, right? What benefit does combining a B12 or a D with an active drug actually give you? And this is the reason why they're called irrational drug combinations, because there is really no clinical reason why you need that. But the fact is, the moment you make it a fixed dose combination, you come away from under the National Drug Price Control Order, which basically means that you're allowed to charge. And this is the reason why the drug, Dr. Gupta, that you said, you can have a single dosage for 30 rupees and a fixed dose combination for 100 rupees. Right? Because the 100 rupee drug is not under DPCO, although it doesn't offer any benefit clinically to the patient. And this is a major issue that we have within our drug supply. And unfortunately, to fix this, there has to be political will. And there isn't much in India at this moment to try and fix this issue.
Just related with that, one of our viewers, Mr. R.A. Malik, he had the question related with that. He said, why is there such a difference in the first place? why do you have the same salt in one company for 100 rupees and why 30 rupees? Like, why is the reason even, like, why is the difference even there? Yeah.
There is certain market that basically
Sorry.
No, we lost you for a second.
Voice.
Now you're back.
Sorry.
You're back.
Oh, sorry, my bad. So you're asking me, why is there such a difference in price, right? Why is there such a difference in price between same drug, one for 30 rupees and the other one for 100 rupees, right? And there are many factors for this. There's no way that I can point you to a single thing and say, this is the reason why this is happening this way. So let me just give you some examples, right? The first thing is, remember, health is a state subject under Indian law. What that means is that the procurement of medicines for government programs, for example, falls within both the remit of state and the center. So state governments run health programs. They buy medicines, at the state level for state programs. For national programs, like, for example, Indian Army, for example, central government health schemes, for example, Indian Railways, right? These are all procurement done at the national level. The reason, because we don't have a consistent way of procuring medicine, some companies make medicine that are procured by the state administrations, which probably don't hold up to high level of standards that the national government has. And if you do that, obviously the cost of medicine is different, what the state procures, number one. Number two is that, there are certain medicines that fall under the NLEM list and some don't, which we talked about earlier, right? The third thing is branding, right? So if a company invests in promoting a drug, obviously they will try and recoup the cost of that drug some way, right? That is the reason why some of these branded, promoted drugs are more expensive, although they have the same ingredient as a drug that is, a generic drug that is made and sold by some other company. Remember, the government's, 3 years ago started this thing called the Jan Aushadhi scheme, right? This was a scheme that was started with the government to say, look, we're going to set up, public procurement, retail shops, Jan Aushadhi shops across the country, which will provide inexpensive, good quality generic drugs, right? Although it has run into a lot of problems, the quality has not been consistent. The goal is to be able to get away from branding, to be able to provide good quality generic medicines available at these stores. The intention is really good, but we have supply chain problems in those drugs. So to go back to the question you're asking, why are some more expensive than others? Number of these factors come into that, to what really happens that drives the cost of the drugs up.
Got it. Mr. Thakur,
okay, but tell me.
Go ahead.
Yeah, no. So as a consumer, so let me step back. When I was in med school, I remember my professor told me, he mentioned this, and that time I didn't understand what he said. He said, Sameer, the most expensive drug is the drug that does not work. Absolutely. Now we've talked about medicines. How can you be a smart consumer and try and identify and say, you know what, ye achhi company ki dawai hai, right? This is what I should buy, or this is the right medicine. Because we've talked that companies sometimes. So what are your thoughts about that? How can I be more active? How can I be more educated?
Yeah. So that's absolutely the right question to ask, right? So I think that the more we become aware as consumers, the better our governments respond to it, right? If we begin demanding better regulation, better transparency, then the governments will respond to that. Now, so how do you get better at becoming more aware? Number one, try and educate yourself. So I just told you that there is a website, the government puts out these lists of drugs that they test. And those that fail, they publish it, right? How many of your consumers really know that such a thing actually exists, right? The first thing is to try and educate yourself. Information is available. Today, everybody has access to smartphones and internet. This information is available. Find out, if you are on a long-term maintenance medication that you take for hypertension, take for diabetes, right? These are long-term, these are not, short-term medications, right? So educate yourself that there is information available out there, and then try and do that. Number two is that, I know this is hard and I know doctors are really busy, but when you go see the doctor, and try and understand, why, certain medicines are the way that they are. Like, for example, we talked about fixed dose combinations. Do you really need vitamin B12? If an FDC is being written for you, ask the doctor, right? Because the moment you become educated and more aware, the doctors will also respond to that, right? That's number two. Number three, one of the biggest responsibilities that we have as a consumer is to report if things don't work, right? So we have in India an organization under the Ministry of Health called the National Pharmacovigilance Commission, right? The reason they exist is because they collect data on stuff that doesn't work, right? So, I mean, remember, one of the ways that we measure quality is by the states sending out drug inspectors to sample commercially available samples and then test them in the labs. Another way to do this is if either consumers or physicians and the staff in the hospitals report things that are not working, right? This area is called pharmacovigilance, right? So anything to do with adverse events, anything to do with lack of efficacy, they collect this information. And this information is then used to try and effect some change in the drug supply, right? If we don't report, obviously the government doesn't know, right? A lot of us don't even report this. A lot of times what happens is we go to our doctor and we're given a medicine, we try it for 3 or 4 days, 3-4 दिन के बाद we go back to the doctor and say, I don't feel any better. The doctor says, आपकी दवाई change कर देते हैं, right? And then what happens is that we don't ask, क्यों change कर रहे हो दवाई आपकी? Try and understand what was wrong with the earlier medicine that was given to you and report that back to the government, right? Because if there is data, then the government is compelled to do something about it. Today, because we don't report, obviously we don't have a problem.
So
right? These are the things.
Yeah.
Sorry,
so the onus is on us as a consumer.
Us as a consumer, absolutely.
That we have to start reporting.
Correct. So part of this is also our own education in our investment in our health. The few minutes that you can do to report these things make a huge difference, because the government knows that there are hundreds of thousands of complaints coming about a specific brand or a drug. Then they have to do something about it, right? They can't be sitting on it, right? Exactly. So part of this is our own responsibility, right? Become an educated and aware consumer. Understand what your health really means. So these are certain things that we really have. So those are the things that we have to do, right? I mean, as a doctor, again, even your staff, when you see lack of effect in some medicine that you prescribe, or if you see adverse events, these have to be reported to the National Pharmacovigilance Commission, so that they keep track of these things, right? Whether it's a drug or a device that you're using, all of these things, the data is collected, and then they do something with this data.
As a doctor, I don't. In the US, I knew of a very strict protocol that was followed for reporting this. But in India, I'm almost certain that not many, less than 1% of the doctors or healthcare workers even know how to report it and where to report it and to whom to tell.
I think that's part of the problem. Yeah.
It is. And part of this is the government needs to educate this, right? Like, for example, this should be a part of the license renewal for the doctors, right? Medical Council of India should make it partly responsible. So when you renew your license, then you get a continuing medical education saying, this is how we report. This is how we track, bad quality drugs in our system, right? Part of this has to be a part of our curriculum, our licensing guidelines. Unfortunately, it hasn't happened. This is where we really, really need to pay attention to, as you said, how many doctors actually report these things.
Right. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. So we've been speaking about allopathy, but in India or even in the world, natural is the way to go. And, as in allopathy, we have evidence-based medicine. So a lot of times we tell people that, we have research that backs that this medication will work. Yeah. A lot of times in naturopathy, we may not have that evidence, but there are a lot of medicines that are available. Even something like a concoction like Chamanprash, for example, that. So are there regulations? So whatever regulations, there are some regulations in place, I know, for allopathy, but what about Ayurveda? What about all these natural medicines that we take? Because there are moments, there are times when we as doctors see people coming in with a lot of side effects from long-term consumption of certain medications. So what are your thoughts?
So this, and I would just like to add one thing to what Dr. Sonia said, that it is not just Ayurveda. everybody is taking some formulation of an Ayurvedic medicine or a natural medicine, which is more so today than any time else, because now this that thing that everybody's taking for immunity for COVID, where they mix, I'm forgetting what the name of the medicine, what the concoction is called, but everybody's taking it. Each and every patient of mine, 90% of my family members are taking this concoction.
So listen, this is an area which requires more study, right? So India, like China, has a very rich tradition of traditional medicine in our country, right? So and there are benefits to that. There's really no question about it, and people swear by it, right? But we have to, as practitioners of medicine, right? You have to ask the simple question: what evidence exists, right, that these things are beneficial to you, right? That's the difference between practicing evidence-based medicine and practicing other forms of therapy. The issue is this, right? Dr. Sonia talked about Chyawanprash. There are a number of different manufacturers of Chyawanprash, right? The ancient text says Chyawanprash is supposed to contain these ingredients, these herbs, these concoctions. This is how Chyawanprash is made. But we have Chyawanprash made by different companies. How do you know that one Chyawanprash made by one company is equivalent to the Chyawanprash made by a different company, right? Or even the one that's made by one company, complies with the standard. Remember, we talked about 100 milligram ibuprofen. The government has a standard to say that 100 milligram ibuprofen is supposed to be this much, right? We have nothing like that for, either, the Ayurvedic medicines. Everything that falls within the Ministry of Ayush, right? The Unani, Siddha, homeopathy, Ayurveda. So the point I'm trying to tell you is that it sounds great to say, oh, you know what, at least it's not going to do you harm like the evidence-based medicine, because, any medicine that you take, because it's, it is something that you're putting in your body that's not core to your body, will have side effects. What we have seen, and Dr. Abby Phillips, if you follow him, has systematically documented, is that long-term use of these concoctions, especially because they are laced with heavy metal, have a bad, sort of effect on the human physiology. And by the time you go to a doctor, a lot of times this is reversible. And so it sounds very good to say it's natural, right? Or the fact that, it is in the ancient texts. The question is that, are there any standards for quality, right? Does the government, have some way of measuring what you are consuming in the spoon of Chyawanprash that you eat every morning does not contain mercury? Because that's not good for your organs, right? Or lead, for example. These are extremely important manufacturing standards that the government should enforce. Unfortunately, that doesn't happen in India today, right? So I think this is an area that really requires a lot of study. It requires a lot of, regulation at some point in time. Because remember, holistic medicine is not supposed to be used for immediate therapy, right? This is like, long-term building your body's, systems, to be able to work in combination with each other, right? It is this reason why we put turmeric in our food, because turmeric has antiseptic qualities. But you're not going to consume 100 milligrams of turmeric every day, right? This is what you put in dal, because that's what there are some medicinal property to this, but this takes over a long period of time, consuming in small quantities, for that to actually affect your physiological system, right? That is the theory behind this. We really don't have a body of evidence that says that if you take Chyawanprash, right, and if it's not manufactured according to the standards that are specified in the ancient texts, what is the consequence of doing that in the long run? We have seen people with severe effects on their kidneys, on their pancreas, right? On their liver, because digestion, essentially these organs participate in the way food is digested in our bodies, right? Over a period of time, you see necrosis, you see significant issues with these issues, with consumption of these so-called medicines, that we don't pay attention to them right away, right? And by the time you do, it's too late.
Wow. So basically, the natural remedies are not as natural and not as harmless as someone can.
They are not. They are not. it's a promotion, right? A lot of this is marketing.
Yeah, so that's an important point for everyone to remember, including ourselves.
Yeah.
That these medicines do have unforeseen side effects which may or may not know. So should not be concerned. Now, Mr. Thakur, we just like to, we're almost at the tail end of our discussion. Yeah. So, you've done a lot of work, and first of all, kudos to you and the courage that you came out with for,
thank you.
For
That's
exposing everything. It's very impressive what you've done. It takes a lot of guts, and now you're doing a lot of advocacy, and you have the Thakur Foundation. Can you just talk for a few minutes exactly what you do?
So, as I said, a lot of what happens in the country is that because we don't pay attention to this, right? We worry about our health only when we are sick. We don't worry about our health when we feel healthy, right? It's only at the time that we are sick that we think about, how expensive it is going to be to go get seen by a doctor or get operated or, get onto long-term sort of, care in the care of a nurse or something like that, right? And by the time you do that, it's late. It's too late by the time, to try and affect change. So part of what I'm trying to do with the group of people that I work with is to try and build awareness, right? Part of this is advocacy with the government to try and make them, like, for example, we talked about how we measure the quality of our drug supply, right? How we measure the fact that our system basically does sampling. And when we study sampling of the market, what we realize is the budget that is given to the state drug inspectors to go by, it is not enough to actually sample properly, right? So they're given a meager budget. Now you realize in oncology, which is a huge issue in our country right now, the cost of medicines is astronomical, right? A 20,000 rupee budget to buy medicines is not going to help, drug inspector buy an oncology medicine to get it tested. How do you then find out, what kind of oncology drugs do we have in our market, right? These are some realistic, systematic issues that we have to study and then bring it to the attention of our government, right? So there is a mechanism. So our parliament runs through what is called a parliamentary standing committee that looks at these issues. But 9 out of 10 times, they don't have the means, they don't have the understanding. So it's incumbent upon people to try and bring them to their attention, saying, look, this is what is happening, this is the data, and you really need to pay attention to this. If you're going to rely on the way that we're sampling drugs, then either you have to increase the budget for an inspector so that they can actually buy, the expensive medicines and sample it, or find a different way of assuring quality of oncology meds, because those are really expensive. They're running lakhs of rupees per dose, right? No drug inspector is going to be able to find that. So these are the advocacy kind of things that we are trying to do with the expectation. And a part of this is also educating the consumer. What you and I are doing today is, again, an effort to try and educate the consumer so that when you think about medicine, you don't think about it when you're sick. Think about it when you're not, because if you don't think about it right now, when you fall sick, it'll be too late for you to be able to do anything about it. So advocacy is part of that.
Wonderful. Absolutely wonderful. Before we end, I just wanted to we've had a lot of questions, and actually we've managed to answer quite a few of them. But sure. I think in the nutshell, a lot of people just wanted to know, are there particular brands they have to be aware of? And I think one thing is basically going online, as you said, and I think going and reviewing is going to be. So I'll repeat the website again. It's www.cdso.gov.in.
It's CDSCO. CDSCO.
CDSCO. Yeah. So
CO. Yeah. It's you can. I mean, if you go to Google and then type in Central Drug Control Organization in India, right? So it'll come up. CDSCO.gov.in, and there's a ton of information out there.
Yeah, I think.
There's still a lot of questions pouring in. There's one last question. Let me just ask you. Which Mr. Arjun Goyal has asked. He said, if a company is bent on duping the system, the regulators and all, what practical way is there for customer or investors to stay ahead of the curve? If you have any words of wisdom.
That's a very good question. Unfortunately, the only way you can do that, Mr. Goyal, is if the law provides you a recourse to doing that, right? If the law doesn't provide a recourse for you to doing that, it's very hard to do. I mean, I can talk a little bit about some of the other work that we've been doing. is to try and bring legal means, into the legal system. So, for example, in the United States, there is a law that actually has whistleblower protection, right? So, if you report something that you believe is either fraudulent or it's criminal, the law essentially allows the government to investigate this confidentially until a point that they either establish what your allegations are true or dispute what your allegations are true. And a lot of this is done confidentially. In India, we have a very sordid history of this, right? So I can tell you some of the names of people who essentially were killed. Shanmugam Manjunath, he was a whistleblower in the national sort of highway construction schemes, right? Even this gentleman, Sanjeev Chaturvedi, who was a whistleblower in the AIMS situation in Delhi, essentially has been made a white elephant, right? Everything has been taken away from him. So the law doesn't provide mechanisms in India for recourse to these kind of things. So if the company is bent on fooling you, defrauding you, breaking the law, you have to act within the legal framework that we have, right? And our legal framework in India has a lot to be desired in what we need to do to enable people who have knowledge of this, right, understand what is really happening, so that we can put some structure in place, some systems in place, right, and then make it more constructive, so that it helps everybody around.
Great. I think this has been an excellent session. Thank you, Mr. Thakur.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you again for organizing. It's been really helpful.
Don't log off just yet. Okay, thank you, viewers.
And thank you so much to our viewers for taking out time, for such an important topic, because it is, through Voice of Health, we try to bring awareness on different topics, related with healthcare. And I think medicines, the medicine we take is always, a mystery and always something everybody's concerned about. Everybody's always wondering what is going to happen. So thank you for taking out time to view us. And if you have any other questions, please definitely, send us in and we'll try to answer them. And we'll share the website link as well, so that you can, log on and start checking on your medications. And before we end, COVID is on fire. We keep on stressing on it. We always do it on our, on our site. Please, please, please wear masks. Don't underestimate the use of masks. Don't underestimate, the use of social distancing, hand washing. You believe it or not, while the Facebook Live, I've had 3 messages from 3 different people suffering from COVID asking to speak to me right now. The point is, COVID is rampant, so please stay safe, everyone. Please take care, and wishing you all a very good night and a good day. Take care. Bye-bye. Thank you so much, Mr. Thakur, again.